Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Here we have a video which was popularised on Twitter recently. I say popularised, it only has 11 likes, 74 retweets and comments, and the general reaction seems to be a ratioing. But this is a message from the EU Home Affairs Office Radicalisation Awareness Network, or RAN, about a hypothetical situation around a young girl called Hannah. Hannah is alarmed after two friends are harassed by a group of African men. She's on the verge of joining a far-right extremist group. Is Hannah in danger of becoming radicalised? Watch the fictional case study with Hannah to find out. So, I have downloaded this particular video, and we're going to go through it because it is an absolute shit show.
Meet Hannah. She's 19. She lives in a suburb of a big city with her mother and two younger siblings. They have a small apartment. Two of her friends were recently harassed by a group of young men of North African descent.
Perfectly reasonable for a small city, apparently, that these two men, this group of men, has harassed one of her friends. Now, the brunt of this video is trying to convey the idea that she has become completely radicalised by this single, isolated incident. This is something I see other commentators failing to pick up on. This group claims that it is a single moment of harassment that is causing this fictional story. One of the things which has become patently obvious to me over the course of my time examining the grooming gangs, and of course living in London, where there is a lot of harassment, is that none of these incidents happens in isolation. What will have actually happened in a situation like this is that Hannah's friends will have been consistently harassed. Hannah herself may have been harassed. One of my friends, who I would say has become a lot more radicalised than perhaps I have, was spat on by Pakistani men in her youth. And this is what has caused her to really have a kind of genuine resentment. It is because of a deeply personal experience. Very few people are actually radicalised by the effect of things on just their friends, unless their friend was murdered, or raped, or really severely beaten, or something like that. And all of a sudden they come to them and they say, look, this has happened to me. It was this group of people, and they did it because I was not one of them. Those are the people who are the most radicalised. The second group of people who are the most radicalised are parents. Parents who see their children being abused, especially by the children of other parents, who refuse to take action to curb their children's behaviour. This is why, when I went up, for instance, to look at the Ellie Williams case, the vast majority of people who were coming out were the mothers and the sisters and the family members of those who had been abused, or who knew those who had been abused. This is the second group, the kind of the secondary abusers. Now, the Ellie Williams case is horrendously complicated, and in no way should that be taken out of my position on whether or not Ellie is guilty or innocent of the things which have been said against her, or of the things which have been done to her, potentially. The case is still ongoing. I'm hoping to cover it next year. Sorry that that's a bit inconclusive for everyone. Anyway, back to this. People become radicalised because they see it happening in their communities. Now, it is the case that rumour can abound, and this can lead to effectively witch hunts after particular people and particular groups. However, this doesn't seem to be the case if the law is applied equally to all, consistently and fairly. It is one thing to have an incompetent police force who do not have access to the techniques of modern policing, and therefore there are groups of criminals who are getting away with certain crimes, and it's not that the police aren't trying, they're just incapable of solving that crime. Whereas what we have today is a massive permissiveness within our judicial system, a massive permissiveness of our police force, where we do see convictions for crimes which are primarily migrant committed, such as the grooming gang scandal. The sentencing is woefully low, the conviction rate is woefully low, and when I talk about woefully low, I'm talking about people who are being convicted of tens of cases, receiving on average something like 3.5, 4.5 years in the prison system, which is a light slap on the wrist, and they come straight back out again, and a lot of them repeat offend, from what I understand. Appreciate I have no stats to back that up at this time, and you can take that as conjecture, but it is the general trend of things that I see in all of my research, and I have been through, with the aid of my researcher, a chap called Prometheus, over 2,000 articles on rape and grooming gang scandals. So, leaving aside the fact that this particular case is just inaccurate, it is just not a case which would happen in terms of the prevalence of it. People are generally not radicalized against an entire group of people purely on the basis of a single second-hand incident.
The cousin of one of her friends has since warned her that migrants will take over the suburb, the city, and soon the entire country.
This is a statement which isn't refuted, and as psychologists note, in-group preference is a huge thing, in particular amongst all communities, apart from amongst white liberals in particular. They are the only demographic to display an out-group preference. All other groups demonstrate varying levels of in-group preference, and as any statistical extrapolation will tell you, if you even have a 0.1% in-group preference, over time groups will become segregated. As we have had unprecedented immigration to this country, particularly since the late 1990s, under Blair's government and beyond, which increased the number of migrants in this country from 1 in 20 to 1 in 6, and that's just up to 2011. We don't know the total number until the census comes out in 2022, after being conducted in 2021. This is not to say that migrants are bad, per se, but that the scale of the immigrants, and the number of them as recorded by the Oxford Migration Observatory, which is not a far-right or an extremist source, reveal that migrants as a whole are net takers. They are not contributors to our economy, and may in fact cost us somewhere in the region of triple figures of the billions. Additionally, we have towns in the north, including one town whose name unfortunately escapes me, which have become unrecognisable, not just on the face of it, and not just in the low-resolution view of more brown people, but unrecognisable culturally, because we have been pursuing a project of multiculturalism, the largest mass immigration experiment in all of human history, and these are the consequences of it. Slow, stable, incremental immigration produces hard-working, committed, and culturally acclimated migrants. When you do not do this, you end up with a first wave of those culturally acclimated migrants, followed by groups of people who see themselves as moving to neighbourhoods which are their neighbourhoods. It is not the migrants taking over, but it is the culture of the migrants taking over, therefore encouraging only one way. Multiculturalism is in effect colonialism by another name. If you look at India, and Gandhi, who recently, as mentioned on A Fake Accents Unite, is apparently going to be minted on a new set of coins in Britain. His movement was effectively kick the English out, kill those white bastards, as was said by Ashsekar's great-grandmother or some such, because they were resisting a kind of cultural and demographic change. Now, the arguments can be made for whether or not the British were a positive influence in India, but you will notice as well that the same people who claim to abhor colonialism also seem to adore multiculturalism. And so I do not think it is beyond the bounds of any discussion to talk about how these groups of people, offered the incentives that they are, come into our country and do take over towns, cities, neighbourhoods, especially when they are coming in at far greater rates than our birth replacement rate, and so the scale tips in favour of the minority groups. And you have to ask, where is the logical endpoint of this? Is it the abolition of Britain, except as a small collection of colonies within what used to be our own country, as we look out on a legally enforced miasma of perfectly proportioned groups, denoted by skin colour, and whatever arbitrary factor of the week, be it sexuality or gender or transgenderism or whatever it happens to be, and simply resign ourselves to the fact that the Britain that was Britain is no longer that. Change will always happen, but demographic change on this scale has not happened in all of recorded history. Not in any country in the world. And I think it would also be remiss to point out that if this was happening in any other country, the expats living in other countries around the world are not claiming that they should be represented on the council of that nation. That they should not be represented in the parliament of that nation. They should not be represented amongst the aristocracy of that nation, the people making the business decisions. It's like, why are there not more white business owners in South Africa? No one's asking that question. Everyone down there is saying, oh, the farm murders, that's nothing, and these white people deserve what they got for coming in and making money, and therefore stealing the land from the native people. How long, I wonder, it will be before we have such a reckoning over here. But back to the video.
The cousin says girls and women should be extra careful. He also tells Hannah that he and his friends are forming a network to protect the country against migrants.
Because who else will? I mean, I've already mentioned that the police are doing nothing, if not actively aiding and abetting these criminals. Not to mention the fact that their own diversity officers, including a chap from London, I may point out, was found recently to have been involved in a criminal gang of his own and actively pimped out little girls.
This network has links with other like-minded networks throughout Europe and with a network in the United States. Hannah has met some of the cousin's friends and thinks one of them is cute. He invited her to a 3-day summer festival. Hannah tells her mother about her fear of being harassed and how she feels safer now she is friends with a group trying to stop migrants from taking over the country.
Now that her friend has been attacked by a gang of African men, just even assuming the premise of their particular scenario, she has then decided that if that's going to be dangerous for her friend, then she and her friends had best be protected, and so they've formed effectively a gang of their own that has, instead of being supported as the migrants are by NGOs, the local government, the police, and other organisations, Soros-funded, throughout Europe, she will instead get together with a loose network of social media groups, friends, and people who feel that they are going to go around in groups because they are so terrified of being attacked in the street. Noting, of course, that no evidence in this scenario has been presented of these groups becoming violent and of providing their own thing. You know, it's like the Proud Boys in America, for instance. They go to rallies, they defend against Antifa, they occasionally get into scraps, they scream and they shout a lot. But are they actually instigating violence? No. Excluding the odd exception, no. The story I'm hearing here is rising crime in community, perpetrated by members of a particular community with a hatred of another group and another culture, prompts local girl to seek safety in numbers in order to protect both herself and a friend who was also a victim. What's wrong with that?
She's looking forward to the festival. Her mother is worried that her daughter is on a way of joining a far-right extremist movement but does not know what to do.
See, I don't actually think that the mother has this thought at all. This is the thought of a typical suburban graduate mother, for instance. It's not the kind of person who is in this particular situation. I've seen no evidence of that, particularly in all my research. So already we're looking at a scenario which is untenable on multiple fronts. But, this mother would trust her daughter. She's also observing the same things. The mother would have to be incredibly short-sighted. And when it comes to far right, all we know about this thing is it's a group of friends, networked across Europe, looking to protect each other from being harassed by migrants, a phenomenon which has been catalogued and is irrefutable in their scenario. That's not far right. They are not holding rallies to incite violence against these people. It is purely a defensive tactic as far as this scenario is concerned. A far-right organisation indeed.
She calls the community police for assistance.
Oh, the PCSOs will do something about it. Oh, PCSOs, by the way, for those of you watching from another country, cannot arrest people. They are there to deal with community disputes. They are there to be conflict managers. They are there to help ease tensions between families. What ends up actually happening is they're completely ineffectual and the laughingstock of Britain.
We asked RAND practitioners to share their opinions about the case of Hannah.
We are going to get into these RAND practitioners and the particular groups that they come from, and I'll explain each as they come up.
I think the community police could help the mother with finding other contacts, other institutions which maybe know strategies or ways or have programs for individuals like that, or even for parents which are concerned, so that she kind of is linked to institutions which have more specific knowledge on the case.
Basically, go to institutions, go on a de-radicalization program, educate yourself. That's the first step. And I would say that it's incredibly disingenuous as well to assume that these people are not well read on these things, because what ends up happening is, even if you have a large group of people who are, unwilling to learn or unable, for instance, to gain access to all of the information which is available via the media, the internet, and everything else, or perhaps, for lack of a term, they're just too low IQ to comprehend or use statistics, there are inevitably stars among them, leaders in the community who also have access to these statistics. And for every program of de-radicalization which says, well, actually, the vast majority of migrants are a benefit to the country. All it takes is one community leader to turn around and say it's exclusively Western European migrants for that, and the rest of it's there, to delegitimize the entirety of the de-radicalization training, which is not to say that they don't that they're not effective at brainwashing people. One of the interesting films I watched recently was American History X, and one of the things I liked about that film was, as much as the white supremacy in the film was abhorrent, and not what I would consider to be the correct path to go down, the white supremacists are never treated with kid gloves. Edward Norton's character, I can't remember his name, is never treated as if he is an idiot. He provides the statistics for all of the things. He's got the personal experience to back it up. It's very easy to see how he would become radicalized. And whereas these things, like the amount of just academic jargon about, different programs and so on and so forth, is so insidious. It's so vague. It's so, there's nothing there. It says, you could go to this website. There's a particular resource there. Here's a guidebook. No, it's all got to be done in these special de-radicalization programs. You'd think that sunlight would be the best disinfectant. You might say, well, one of the basic things, one of the first things that we do is we point them towards this particular resource, which refutes like the 5 big questions which white supremacists, the far right has, that racists and blah blah blah, that they all have, the 5 biggest things about immigration, the 5 biggest myths. And it's this particular resource and it comes here. But no, they don't do that. They don't do that. Like this basic idea that, especially for this scenario, where this young woman is just, effectively what they would consider to be flirting with the far right. But effectively, she's met a guy at this group who are now protecting her because she and her friends are being harassed on the street. And she hasn't really engaged with the ideas of this. She just knows what her friend has experienced and what she doesn't want to have happen to her. So, if you suddenly, this cousin has come in as a radicalizing influence, and so it should be a simple matter to effectively say, it's as easy as this, you could just debunk it right here. But no, they're not going to do that. One of the things that none of these practitioners do is recommend resources throughout the entirety of this video. I think it's also important to understand who Mosaic are. Mosaic is the organisation which this woman belongs to, or that she does look about 16. I don't know how old it is. Basically, this is an anti-Muslim racism and democracy education. I appreciate this is translated from Google. It's aimed at all young Hamburg residents, focusing on anti-Muslim racism and all forms of exclusionary practice. Now, assuming that translation is correct, you'd think that they would be targeting Islamist youth for that, because the most exclusionary group is Islam. There is nothing more exclusionary than Islam. Anyway, so that's one group. It also appears, it took me ages to find this one. You had to search out the actual particular city. But again, just this whole diversity is our strength is the idea. And again, it's all a lot of mealy mouth. Let's hear what the next gentleman has to say.
Is linked to institutions which have more specific knowledge on the case.
Alors, avant de conseiller quelque chose à la mère, j'essaierai de lui faire comprendre d'abord comment se forme un groupe radicalisant. Ce qui est important dans le cas de Anna, c'est que le père n'est pas présent.
The father isn't present, and therefore she's more open to radicalisation. It's like fatherlessness is not an issue. Is radicalisation a massive issue, for instance, then in the black community? Because that's where fatherlessness is the worst. I'd be curious to see what he thought about that. But again, he's not offered anything which is specific to this particular case. It's important to understand how radical groups are created. Yes. How does that help de-radicalise someone who says, yep, this is how the radical group has been created, and I so far agree with what they're saying, because you haven't refuted any of it. The far-right narrative. Also, can I just say how infuriating this music is? It's insane. It's like some kind of an epic journey across Middle-earth is going on. No, anyway.
The violent far-right extremism has...
I wonder if this guy even knows really what the actual specifics are, or whether or not he came in, was given a brief overview of the case, and then was just asked his opinions on far-right extremism. Because these are all incredibly short clips from each of these interviewees. And this chap, Nicholas Henin, he's actually a journalist, and he was captured by ISIS, I think, in the Middle East. So he's supposed to be an expert on the Middle East. And so they've come in and they're asking him about terrorist groups. That's what I think is happening here. I don't think they're actually asking him about this specific case.
At this time, three main targets: foreigners, xenophobia, Muslims, and Jews. Well, potentially only one of the they will target only one of the three, but potentially the three. And I would add to some extent what we call the system. So they will be anti-system, anti-state, anti-government, anti-institutions, everything.
Oh, I wonder why. Those fascists, eh? They're so anti-state. Rubbish. The truth of the matter is that these people have disengaged from state structures because they are not helping them in their everyday life. Also, our state is one of the largest in the world, as are other ones in, for instance, France. And there is a growing hunger amongst the people for a retraction of state powers before it becomes too all-encompassing. I would argue that it is already too all-encompassing. But what is it that is separating? I mean, not all extremists are anti-state. Take the communists, for instance. Anyway, as you can see, his answer has absolutely nothing to do with the specifics of the question, the specifics of the situation, sorry. And I don't think he was actually asked about the situation.
Definitely, the hatred towards migrants is something that is one of the pillars of the far-right extremist narratives.
It is not hatred of foreigners or even xenophobia to have the preference for your own group where you live. It's not even expansionary because it is constrained by the borders of the United Kingdom. The people who are moving here are expansionary and effectively telling our culture to get out. It is not xenophobic to tell someone to get out of your own home when you are under attack there.
Donc ces groupes radicalisants, la première chose qu'ils disent pour qu'on les rejoigne, c'est on est en danger. On est en danger maintenant.
But they can prove it. That's the thing. Like, this is not just an extremist group. This is the narrative of every single special interest group. You know, it was the voice of the women. We are in danger now. We do not have representation. That's the feminists. That's the suffragettes. However much influence you want to say, that was the narrative. It's the gay lobby moving for more rights. We do not have the same rights as other people in this country. Being gay is considered to be a mental disorder up until 1982. We are in danger. We are in danger now. These people, we are being harassed on the street. The police are doing nothing. Our girls are being raped up and down this country in over 72 towns and cities. We are in danger now and across Europe. Help. Saying we are in danger is not a marker for the illegitimacy of a claim or a movement, if it can be backed up and proven.
The first assessment, probably to do with, in Anna's case, would be to check how...
Now he's been asked about Hannah. So this is specific. So I think he was asked first, what's your, what are the factors which influence far-right ideology? And then he said, looking at the scenario, what's your opinion on this now?
Anchored she is with this far-right extremist ideology, or if it is just a very superficial engagement because...
This seems like a man, this Nicholas Hennin chap, is the reasonable scientist brought on the History Channel to be asked about, Mayan civilization before they bring on the crackpot who's talking about aliens. Like, he seems like a reasonable person who doesn't seem to have... He's not promoting anything. He's just defining things and then saying, perhaps it's not far right.
She is afraid by, these colored people living in our neighborhood.
She's not afraid of them because they're coloured. She's afraid of them because they're a group who are attacking. If it was a group of Christians or Sikhs or Muslims, or if it was a group of, youths, could be an age-based thing. If it is a group of crack dealers, if it was a bunch of drug addicts, it would be exactly the same. The colour is just a simple way to reference them because these are the group of people who are doing it. And, hashtag not all, but if it's the general thesis that if you're going to be harassed by someone in that particular part of town, you're going to be harassed by these particular groups of people, then you're going to denote them by what they are. Surely.
Because of this fear and because of the stories of harassment that she heard from her friends, maybe she just looks for a way to reassure herself.
In the network I am active at, which is called Mosaic, it's in Hamburg, and we work to build projects or environments for individuals to exchange ideas, to talk about certain topics that are important to them in their lives, also about politics, also about society, and also to create safer spaces for them to talk about experiences that they have. And this really helps to build critical thinking skills.
Well, we share our
critical thinking skills, so they claim. Perhaps you weren't harassed. Perhaps your perception of that harassment was not as bad. Here are some statistics compiled by the corrupt police force, the corrupt judiciary. Here's the conviction rate, actually, for harassment. Here you can see how actually it is xenophobia and white people harassing these poor migrants, which is causing them to lash out at you in your community. I don't know, man. This seems like a radicalisation program if ever I had seen one.
Our stories. We share our stories as somebody of the oppressed group, and through our stories, youngsters many times understand that it is easy to hate.
So he's claiming at this point that Hannah isn't the oppressed group. She's not the one being oppressed by the fact that her and her friends are being harassed. In fact, the person who harassed them is oppressed, and they're under a lot of pressures, and they're in a low-income area, and they're perhaps on the poverty line, and they have too many children, and their father's not around either, and, well, really, you can't blame them for what's happening. Also, what they end up doing is they end up pulling someone in to share their story. They manage to find one anecdotal case of someone who's saying, well, I was harassed too, on the basis of the colour of my skin, and I'm, that's nasty, isn't it? We can all agree it's bad. And you go, oh my goodness, oh, this poor brown person, he was also harassed. We're not so different, he and I. As opposed to the reality that the vast majority of these people are not this anecdotal case of someone who is reasonable enough and interested enough in progressive politics, and probably quite middle to upper class anyway themselves, probably a graduate from a university environment, not some local community member, coming in and basically giving their life story and explaining how they get microaggressed on the daily, is not representative of the troubles in that particular community. Instead, what you should do is you should pull in one random person, in this case, West African, just pull in one North African migrant, and then see how willing they are to engage. In fact, put them in the same position as Hannah and force them to go through the exact same thing, except bring in a white person and have them explain how it's going. How they're not so different, he and they. See whether or not your de-radicalization works on anyone who isn't a native.
But it requires a lot of effort to really understand, and we offer them that time that can spend with us to learn through our stories how painful it can be if somebody just hates us because of the belonging to the group.
Oh, I'm sorry we harassed you on our street. Why do you hate us? It feels bad to be hated. We don't like that very much. It's going to take a lot of work for you to get over this, but one day you'll understand.
There's being hated, and we try to really work on those fears.
It's not even about them hating the person, it's about them hating the crime, hating the fact that the crime goes unpunished, and then being radicalized against this particular group, because this particular group is being given a free pass.
I think that emotions and fears are part of that, and we try to comfort those youngsters by really just talking. So if they have a fear about migration, but they have never met any migrant.
But we've already ascertained that in this particular scenario, they have met migrants. Again, it's about treating people with kid gloves, as if that people are becoming radicalized just by, being introduced to these ideas with having absolutely zero personal experience themselves. Like, when they say met a migrant, what do you mean? Like, they've been on the butt end of harassment on the street, but I guess they've never been friends with one of the people who's harassing them.
For them, it is pretty shocking if they meet somebody and finally realize that those people can be just really normal part of the society.
They can be, but are they in the majority? And are they in the majority in the area where this harassment is going on?
And should be there. And they can also ask questions.
And should be there! No migrant has the right to be there. They have been accepted by, effectively, grace into the economy because they are there to either serve a function, or because they love the country and have proven so. So it's, you're there because you're moving for work, you're getting a job, and that side of things, or you're there on a permanent visa / citizenship because you love the country, you love the people, you're there to engage, and you want to take on that culture as your own and leave your own culture behind. That's why you come and live in another country. There is no other. Unless you end up with the multicultural experiment where you do not feel like you're moving to another country. And you should, when you go to another country, feel like you're moving to another country, because each country has a character of its own, which is important and valued and valid.
They can just face their fears. So living libraries and storytelling is definitely one of the core that we use in our work.
I would invite Hannah to the Mosaic project, of course, and
I would invite Hannah to my radicalization project. Of course, I'll call it de-radicalization, but it's just radicalization in another direction.
And give her the feeling that that her voice is very important, and not only give her the feeling, also give her the platform to voice her opinion.
Unless her opinion is, these North African migrants have been harassing me and my friend, and perhaps they should be held accountable for their actions or get out.
And to kind of to get engaged in a movement or in some action that she really wants to see in her society.
If we give them the opportunity to express themselves, and if we give them the alternative towards extremists, so somewhere where they can be useful, because I believe that everybody, especially youngsters, they want to feel that they are useful for the society. So we should give them the opportunity to be useful. Otherwise, somebody else will take them.
The belief that one's in-group is the victim of a conspiracy of out-groups is one of the foundations of every extremist ideology.
It's the foundation of like 90% of politics at the moment.
The subsequent victimhood narrative, "we are under attack, you need help," forms a key component of extremist propaganda and recruiting efforts.
Except where it can be proven, at which point it's no longer propaganda, is it?
To promote alternative narratives and counter-narratives and protect vulnerable youth, it is important for practitioners to foster critical thinking and media literacy. This also means identifying, drawing attention to, and raising awareness of propaganda and manipulation effects.
Anyway. Terrible example. Terrible people, misuse of an expert who is actually being captured by terrorists, so that it didn't actually address any real part of the scenario. And yeah, just what a poorly thought out and just flagrantly dishonest and bizarre media campaign. That's all for today. I'm out.